So by way of background, I'm trained as an economist. I'm the Chief Analytics Officer for Evolve. And what I want to talk about today is the questions you ask job applicants. And we have a team of industrial organizational psychologists that know the questions matter, the way you ask them, the way you frame the question, the ordering, how you ask these questions, they all matter. But what's really interesting is when you close the loop and when you match up someone's responses with the job outcome, how long they stayed, how they performed, we get some really interesting insight into which questions predict in the directions you would expect. So I've got 10 minutes, and my goal is to turn all of you into industrial organizational psychologists. And if there are any in the audience right now, you guys obviously hate me. We're just going to move on. So really quickly, what Evolve does is, all of you are familiar with Moneyball, the notion of applying data and analytics to talent acquisition and recruiting in baseball. We see the same evolution going on in credit card industry, using algorithms to target fraud risks and calculate credit limits, so on and so forth. In healthcare, we're seeing this transformation as well. We're applying it to recruiting and the workforce. We're sitting on a pretty big pile of data. So we have, as our clients, 20% of the Fortune 100, about 3 million employee records, and 100 million assessment responses. The database is growing year over year, it's doubling. So it's a pretty big pile of data that I'm going to be sharing insights from. Those of you that are monitoring the media know that this is an engaging topic, that there's a lot being written about robot recruiters, as it's termed. But we've seen coverage in the Atlantic Monthly, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Economist. We want to make the point that this isn't, of course, a replacement, but at the end of the day, it's a tool. It's meant to help recruiters make better decisions using more information. And to illustrate that point, I want to use a couple case studies as examples of some of the insight that we've been able to generate from our data. So we had a problem. There's a client of ours that was trying to recruit employees for a frontline customer-facing role. So these are people that are representing your brand. Large hourly employee population. Their issue was low schedule adherence. People weren't clocking in or out on time, and people weren't adhering to protocols in terms of dealing with customers, which made the customers very upset, and they had low CSAT as a result. So our IO psychologists got together and they said, you know, what we really want to be testing for is people who can follow the rules, stick with the protocol, who are relatively honest in their positions. And so we designed questions that tried to tap into this notion of honesty. Now, because it's a computer assessment, you can't ask an open-ended question. So it has to be a choice, and you can't ask someone on a scale of 1 to 5, how reliable are you? Everyone here knows the answer to that question. So we try to sneak it in a little bit by asking them to choose from one of two statements, which one most describes them. So this is one of those. And actually, I want to see how everyone feels. So by show of hands, who would agree with the first statement? I like to see new places and experience new things. Okay, great. And then what about the second one? I am a person who sticks to the rules. Okay, so more endorse the first option, which is good because when we analyze the data, what we found is that people who said that they tended to follow the rules, they stayed for shorter periods of time, their productivity was lower, customer satisfaction was lower, and in fact, they were 67% more likely to be termed for policy violations, for sexual harassment, drug and alcohol violations. So what we learned is that you can't ask someone, are you honest? Because inevitably the people that say yes are the people who are less honest. So our IO psychologists went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, how do we measure honesty? How do we get a good picture of how honest someone is? And what we decided is that we would ask them questions up front in the assessment. How good are you with a computer? What's your typing skill? Can you toggle between screens quickly? All job requirements. And then guess what? 3 screens later, we tested them. We had them do a typing test. We asked them, what's the shortcut for cutting and pasting text in a word processor? And what came out of that is a very clear picture. There were 2 groups of respondents that took the assessment. One was a group that were relatively honest, that they said that their computer proficiency was about on par with what they claimed. The second group were people that were very, very creative in that you'd have people that said, I do software engineering in my spare time. My typing is about 10 words per minute, things like that. And so what we were able to do is then look at the results for those 2 groups of people, and a very clear picture came out. that tenure was longer for that more honest group. They were 8% less absent, so absenteeism was lower, more productive, better customer satisfaction. They did better on every single KPI except for one, and that was sales conversion. I'll let you guys make your own joke about that. So there you go, there's the graph. Okay, so second client. In this case, they're hiring for a frontline sales role. And they hadn't hired for this population before. They asked us, what do we want to be looking for? We did some job analysis, and we said, okay, one thing we want is persuasiveness, people who are relatively convincing. So we inserted a number of questions that tapped into that construct. And as part of the dyads, we also asked what we call distractor items, things that are positive, that seem relevant, but aren't quite what we're trying to get at. So in this case, the two questions are, I am very convincing when I want to be, or I tend to become interested in many topics. Any sense? So raise your hand if you think the first one was a better predictor of sales performance. Anyone? All right. What about the second one? Okay, about evenly split. We found, somewhat surprisingly, that creativity and intellectual curiosity was a very strong predictor of sales performance and conversion in these roles. That people being creative, thinking outside the box, learning how to engage with clients and getting better over time, that was something that was correlated with this notion of creativity. So based on these results, we create a new scale that measures creativity, and we found that it's more predictive of sales performance than anything else. So this is one of those things where we were scratching our heads initially, but ultimately it's a finding that we were able to put into practice and ultimately recruit a better workforce. So with that, I want to ask a couple questions. This is less questions you ask and more your beliefs about recruiting, because we have some data to bear on this. So first off, my best applicants come from employee referrals. Show of hands, who would agree with this? Okay, who would disagree? Okay, handful. You guys are generally right. Referrals are much better employees. They stay 20% longer. They're more productive. They're basically higher on virtually every KPI that there is. We did this study across call center employees, truckers, and software engineers. So when you get a referral, that's actually something that you should take into account. Last question. When screening resumes, I avoid anyone who looks like a job hopper. So by show of hands, how many would agree with this statement? Okay, how many would disagree? Again, about evenly split. So I should point out this is somewhat specific to the hourly workforce, but studying our data, we found actually that there's very little difference between the job outcomes for job hoppers and people with more traditional work histories. And what we like to think is that it's not a matter of how they've done in previous roles and whether they were a fit before, but whether they're a good fit for the next role that they're going to have. So ultimately, the conclusion, the takeaway here is you have to ask questions in the right way, but even more critical is matching up those responses with the outcomes on the job in order to get that feedback loop going and to learn over time and to become adaptive. And successful companies are now doing this. And again, for all of you, I would be shocked if any of you didn't get exposed to some sort of hiring software at some point in your careers. So thank you very much.